China just admitted to something that changes everything. 100 million people. Missing, not dead, not relocated, just never existed in the first place. For decades we were told China's rise was inevitable. The factory of the world. The next unstoppable superpower. 1.4 billion people marching toward dominance. But what if the foundation of that entire story was built on a lie? Let's go back. Because to understand what's happening right now, you need to understand what we were all sold. The year is 2008. Beijing hosts the Olympics. The world watches in awe as China unveils itself, not as a developing nation, but as a rival. Gleaming cities, endless workers, infrastructure projects that made the West look frozen in time. The story was simple. China had the numbers, over 1 billion people, a massive young workforce ready to outcompete anyone. The demographics of destiny, everyone believed it. Investors poured in trillions. Corporations moved their factories. Governments borrowed the playbook. But here's the thing about building an empire on numbers. What happens when the numbers were never real? August 2024. Buried in a quiet government revision, China's National Bureau of Statistics makes a stunning admission. The population didn't peak in 2021 like they said. It peaked in 2017. They'd been overstating their numbers by more than 100 million people for years. Think about that, 100 million people. That's more than the entire population of Germany. And they just weren't there. This wasn't a rounding error. This was systematic fraud, and it gets worse. Because researchers now believe even the revised numbers are still inflated. Some estimates put the real population as low as 1.17 billion, meaning China might have overcounted by nearly 300 million people. That's the entire United States just invented. So how does this happen? How does a government lose track of 100 million people? It starts in 1980, the one-child policy. The Communist Party decides China has too many people. 1 child per family. Violators face fines, forced abortions, sterilization. It's brutal, it's efficient. But here's what nobody planned for. In a culture that values sons, families start making choices. Sex-selective abortions, unreported daughters. Baby girls abandoned or hidden to try again for a boy. Millions of girls vanish from official records. Not because they don't exist, but because their parents never registered them to avoid punishment. Now add the incentive structure. Local officials get promoted based on meeting targets. Population growth, that's a target. So you fudge the numbers. You report births that didn't happen. You inflate census data to make your district look good. One village lies to the county. The county lies to the province. The province lies to Beijing. And Beijing? Beijing doesn't want bad news either. Because in an authoritarian system, there's no reward for telling the truth. There's only punishment for making the party look weak. So the lie grows, year after year, decade after decade, until reality catches up. Let me show you what happens when you build an economy on people who don't exist. This is Ordo's Inner Mongolia. Population, 1 million. Capacity, 3 million. It's called a ghost city. And China has dozens of them. Chengong, Ujiapu. Dantu. Thames Town, a replica of an English village that nobody lives in. These aren't small developments. These are entire metropolitan areas. Millions of apartments. Highways, shopping districts. Universities all empty. Meet Chen Wei, not his real name. He asked us not to use it. He spent 5 years building luxury apartments in Zhengzhou. 40-story towers, marble lobbies, pools and gyms on every floor. His company built homes for 200,000 people. 0 families moved in. He hasn't been paid in 8 months. His company dissolved. The developer disappeared. And he's not alone. Across China, millions of families bought apartments in buildings that will never be finished. They're still making mortgage payments on homes they can't live in, because the entire system was built on a bet that China's population would keep growing forever. But the people aren't coming. The birth rate in 2023, 6.4 births per 1,000 people. That's lower than Japan, lower than South Korea. lower than every developed nation that China used to mock for demographic decline. They built cities for a boom that was already over. Evergrande, Country Garden. Sunak, Fantasia, these were the giants, the developers that built modern China. And in the last 3 years, they've all collapsed. Evergrande alone, over $300 billion in debt. That's not a company failing. That's a Ponzi scheme imploding. Here's how it worked. Developers would sell apartments before they were built. Take that money, use it to buy more land. Sell more apartments, use that money to finish the first project. Maybe. Local governments loved it. They sold land to developers at inflated prices. That money funded everything. Schools, hospitals, local official salaries. In some cities, land sales made up 80% of revenue. Banks loved it. Real estate meant collateral. Collateral meant safe loans. Safe loans meant bonuses. Everyone made money. As long as prices kept going up. As long as people kept buying. At its peak, real estate was 30% of China's entire economy. Construction, materials, financing, services, everything touched property. And it was all built on the assumption of endless population growth. But you can't sell apartments to people who were never born. Now developers are bankrupt. Local governments are broke. Banks are sitting on trillions in bad loans they can't admit to. And the party's solution? Silence. Arrest the protesters. Censor the news. Pretend it's under control, it's not. After decades of high birth rates, China has a massive young population. Workers everywhere. The demographic dividend that powered the boom. The base collapses. Fewer children. Fewer workers entering the workforce. And a massive generation about to retire. If current trends hold, and they're actually getting worse, China will have more people over 60 than under 30. Here's the problem. Those retirees need pensions. Healthcare. Support. And there aren't enough young workers to pay for it. In 1980, you had 6 workers for every retiree. By 2050, 2 workers per retiree. Maybe less. The government knows this. They've tried everything, ended the one-child policy, offered cash payments for second kids, tax breaks, propaganda campaigns telling women it's their patriotic duty to have children. And you know what young Chinese people say? No. Because raising a kid in Shanghai or Beijing costs a fortune. Apartments are unaffordable, education is cutthroat, jobs are precarious, and unlike their parents, this generation sees what's coming. They're opting out. The lying flat movement, Tang Ping, refusing to participate in a system that demands everything and promises nothing. Marriage rates plummeting, divorce rates soaring. Birth rates? The lowest in recorded history. And here's the kicker. China's workforce started shrinking in 2015. They've been losing working-age people for almost a decade. You can't grow an economy without workers. You can't maintain infrastructure. You can't fund innovation. You can't even sustain what you've already built. This isn't a temporary dip. This is permanent structural decline. And they lied about it for years. But China didn't just bet on internal growth. They bet the entire future on global dominance. The Belt and Road Initiative, Xi Jinping's signature project. The pitch was brilliant. China would build ports, railways, power plants across Asia, Africa, Latin America. Loan poor countries the money. Chinese companies do the work. Everyone wins. At its peak, over 150 countries signed on. Trillions committed. The new Silk Road. China's path to reshaping the global order. And then it all came crashing down. Sri Lanka, the Hambantota port. China loaned them over $1 billion to build it. Sri Lanka couldn't repay, so China took the port. A 99-year lease, except nobody uses it. It's a white elephant on the coast. And Sri Lanka still collapsed into political chaos. Pakistan, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. $62 billion in projects. Roads that lead nowhere. Power plants that can't find buyers. And Pakistan teetering on default Kenya. A high-speed railway that cost $5 billion and doesn't reach its destination. They can't afford to finish it. Can't afford to maintain what's built. And China wants its money back. Malaysia, Myanmar. Kazakhstan, Ecuador. One by one, countries are renegotiating. Cancelling projects, walking away. Because here's what actually happened. China overbuilt, overcharged, and handed out loans to countries that could never repay them, using inflated population and growth projections that were never real. Now Chinese banks are sitting on hundreds of billions in bad Belt and Road debt, projects half finished, returns that will never come. The global dominant strategy built on the same lie as the ghost cities. We'll have infinite workers, infinite growth, infinite resources to project power. But you can't conquer the world when your own foundation is collapsing. So here's the core question. Why couldn't they fix this? China isn't stupid. They have brilliant economists, world-class engineers. They could see the demographic data. They knew the debt was unsustainable. But here's what happens in an authoritarian system. Reshaping, one of China's most prominent economists. In 2021, he published a report warning that China's demographic collapse was worse than official numbers suggested. He called for radical policy changes. His social media was shut down. His firm dissolved. He vanished from public life. It's the same pattern over and over. Economists who warn about debt, silenced. Journalists who investigate ghost cities, arrested. Local officials who report real numbers, demoted or worse. Because Xi Jinping's entire legitimacy rests on the China dream. The great rejuvenation, the inevitable rise. Admitting the dream was built on fake numbers. That's not just an economic problem, that's a political crisis. It threatens the party's entire narrative of competence and control. In an open society, you can have brutal debates. Economists yell at each other. Politicians lose elections. Markets punish bad policy. The system adapts. In an authoritarian system, there's no mechanism for course correction. No way to admit failure without threatening the entire structure. Remember zero COVID? They held that policy long after it stopped making sense. Not because the science supported it, but because Xi had personally endorsed it. Changing course meant admitting he was wrong. It took mass protests and economic collapse before they suddenly reversed. No transition, no plan, just chaos. That's happening now with everything. The demographic crisis, the debt crisis, the real estate collapse. Everyone around Xi knows the truth, but nobody can say it. So instead of fixing problems, they hide them. Instead of adapting, they double down on control. More surveillance, more censorship, more arrests, more nationalist rhetoric to distract from domestic failure. And while they're tightening control, the best and brightest are leaving. Capital flight, brain drain. Entrepreneurs moving to Singapore, Taiwan, the US. They're cracking down on their own tech sector, killing innovation in the name of ideological purity. You can't innovate your way out of a crisis when you're arresting innovators. You can't adapt when adaptation means admitting you were wrong. And history shows us where this leads. Authoritarian systems don't reform. They calcify, and then they break. So what does this mean for the rest of us? For decades, the world economy ran on a simple assumption. China makes everything, and they'll keep making more. That's over. Supply chains are already shifting. Apple to India, Samsung to Vietnam. Automakers to Mexico. Companies that spent decades building operations in China are quietly moving out. The IMF now projects China's long-term growth will slow to near zero by 2050. Not because of sanctions, not because of competition, because they're running out of people. The geopolitical implications, massive. A rising power is patient, willing to wait, play the long game. But a declining power, that's when things get dangerous. When the window is closing, when leaders feel pressure to act now or lose the chance forever. And yet Western politicians are still talking about China like it's 2010, the unstoppable rival, the inevitable superpower. They're not seeing what's actually happening, the internal decay, the unsustainable trajectory. Most importantly, remember this isn't about Chinese people. This is about a system, a communist party that prioritized control over truth. That built an empire on lies, and now ordinary people are paying the price for decisions they had no voice in. 100 million people who never existed. That's not just a statistic. That's the foundation of modern China. That's the bet that trillions of dollars, decades of policy, and an entire global order were built on. and it was never real. The rise didn't end because of the West. It didn't end because of democracy or capitalism or competition. It ended from within. If this kind of analysis matters to you, real investigations, uncomfortable truths, stories that cut through the noise, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning of what's coming. The whole world order is shifting, and nobody's telling you the truth about it. We are.